Hello everyone, welcome to the first edition of the Sphere Festival, and this is the afterward session where we'll be talking to the filmmakers whose films we are showing currently on our YouTube channel. So today we have with us a very special guest, Milcho Manchevski, who is a New York-based Macedonian-born film director, photographer, and artist who has made many films over the years. His films Before the Rains, which was released in 1994, won the Golden Lion at Venice Film Festival, and in the following year he was also nominated for the Academy Awards in the Best Foreign Film category in 1995. His recent film Willow was premiered at Rome International Film Festival in 2019, and in between he has made several films like Dust in 2001, Shadows in 2017, Mothers in 2010, and Bikini Moon in 2017. And currently for our festival, he's screening his film The End of Time, which is a brilliant piece, and I think every one of you should catch it up before it goes away from our festival. So End of Time is basically based on a single incident, a single slice of moment in our everyday lives, which you expand temporarily to infuse it with the magical elements which is otherwise unnoticeable in our daily lives. So uh, can you just talk about it? Like, how did you come to conceive the idea? How did you come across the idea of making such a film?
I'm interested in time as seen on film, because film, I believe, is perfectly suited for exploration of the nature of time and our perception of it, just because of the nature of the medium itself. Um, I believe you can delve into how time bounces off of our consciousness in film a little bit better than in other arts. So in this particular case, I wanted to do a very, very simple film that makes you think more complex thoughts. So the idea was to capture a moment in time, just several seconds, and then slow it down to to the point where it's barely moving, where you're not sure whether things, people are moving or not. And that way, as a viewer, you face the elements, the relationships, the people, their issues, their desires within the frame with a different tempo. And this tempo hopefully makes you think about them in a different way. And even though initially it was going to be only this tableau in a sort of a structuralist manner presented to the viewer to examine and reflect upon, as I was making the film, I developed it into a, a tiny narrative where by the end you realize that one of the moments within this tableau, within this frame, is perhaps more important to the participant than the others. And he is enjoying that moment so much so that the time has almost stopped for him. It's the bliss that you feel when you're faced with something that you really really like, and it feels as if the time has stopped.
Right. And this particular time, it almost, I think, happens for few seconds, but it is expanded to 5 to 7 minutes or five to
Yeah.
six minutes. Uh, your film is very photographic in a sense because the temporality is almost verging towards the photograph, but yet there are these tiny movements, tiny shifts, which eventually, culminates into this magical moment towards the end where we can see the child who was all along the film out of focus comes into focus, and we
Yes.
get to know about that character. So I was just thinking, how was it shot? Was it like a constructed scene, or was it shot like on a very spontaneous basis and then it was slowed down?
It's a combination of the two. Basically, it was a block in the town of San Antonio in Dos Baños in Cuba. So all the participants in the film are people who live on that block or nearby. So there's a real documentary texture to it. And the activities are the activities that they would do on a regular afternoon of hanging out with friends and socializing. However, I did arrange them in a particular way so that they work within the confines of the frame and the depth of the frame. So there are things in foreground, midground, background, distant background. There's a car that drives because the street goes like this and then sort of goes up a little bit. You can really compress it on a longer lens. It wasn't a terribly long lens, but it was a little bit longer so that things feel more compressed and more on top of each other. So yeah, it was a combination of real life texture of the documentary, which was then treated through the with the tools of a creator of fiction.
Right, right. It's pretty interesting. Like when I was looking back to your other works, most of them are feature films and they verge on a narrative. There is a narrative logic to it. But the narrative logic in this film is very different. It is actually an exploration of a single time with punctures and, gives us a lot more than what we expected from that single moment. And
Yeah.
so, what made you think of it as a short film? Like, would you like to say something about it? Like, it could have been
Well,
longer. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, it's a great question. Um, I when I went to film school in Illinois, I got introduced to experimental film, big time. My favorite production teacher, Mike Covell, was an experimental, or still is, an experimental filmmaker, and he also taught a class in experimental film, and we all got fascinated by the possibilities of experimental film, whether it be structuralist or conceptualist, or whether it be just more old school like Maya Deren, etc. Stan Brakhage, Michael Snow, and that stayed with me ever since. So experimental film and that area where film is not necessarily a narrative medium, where it comes closer to poetry or comes closer to abstract painting or even to music, has always been really intriguing for me. And I have made several experimental films over the years, but I also always somehow bring in that knowledge of experimental film, that interest in at least in the structuralist aspect of filmmaking into some of my films, such as the three-part structure that then closes, turns on itself, or a film where um, the the documentary, there's a film that's composed of documentary and fiction, and the two have nothing to do with each other except the tone, etc. So I have been interested in bridging this gap between traditional narrative cinema and experimental film. Having said all of that, I'm very conscious of the fact that in a feature film, it's really difficult to do an experiment, a 2 hour experiment. First of all, it would be difficult to get it financed because the financiers are usually interested, not always, but usually interested in straightforward story, in the social implications of the story. Also, there's the issue of how long is the experimental film, the experimental um, thing that you want to talk about. Some of them could require 5 hours. Some of them could require 5 minutes. So this film sort of wanted to be 5.5 minutes, and I was just the medium to bring it to life. Originally, I thought that it was going to be shorter, between 2 and 3 minutes, but then it turned out that it needed those 5.5 minutes to really breathe and to take you on a little emotional journey. So, whatever the story needs, whatever the film needs. Sometimes it's a short film. I did a film that was only 90 seconds long. Sometimes it's a feature film. Sometimes it's a book of photographs. Like right now, I'm putting together an exhibition and a book of photographs that are coming out in a couple of weeks. So whatever that particular piece of art requires, I'm here to serve it.
Right. It's pretty interesting since you were talking about the experimental medium as well as the narrative need that you actually sort of adapt to. But I also feel that there is a character in the film, the three characters who are in the foreground who remain blood all throughout the film. And it is precisely the story of that single boy who sort of he listens to the belly, like the stomach of the pregnant mother or pregnant family member. So and all throughout it was blurred. And then suddenly, at a point of time, the music shifts. The entire structure of the film gets into a second phase, and that is when we get a close up of that person, close up of the child, close up of that mother. And so, is it a story about that guy, or is it also a story that talks about what happens in everyday life, which we miss throughout when we actually walk throughout the same lane and same road? We miss this moment.
Ultimately, it's about the boy. Ultimately, it's a story about the boy, but he is in the community. It's about uh, a happy moment in his life in the community, surrounded by neighbors, surrounded by friends and girls and friends playing baseball, and probably his mom carrying his unborn sister or brother. So it starts as a general tableau of the neighborhood, of the community, and ends up focused on the boy and the sister. Um, it's funny that you mentioned this because the film won several awards. It won an award for editing, even though there's only one cut in the whole film.
Right, right. And just I was personally curious about the editing process because some of the characters seemed to be juxtaposed on the film later on, as if because their focus is so distinct, even though they are so farther away, and the other things are not so well in focus at the same distance. The characters somehow they look like they jut through the frame all of a sudden out of nowhere, like a Dadaist like pasting which comes across the frame, like the character which comes from the left hand side of the frame, he comes out of nowhere. So, uh, are these real characters or were they put later on? Or what's the digital manipulation at work here? Would you like to speak about that?
Yeah, I guess I'll have to ruin the magic for those who haven't seen the film. It feels, and I've been asked often, it feels as if there's a lot of CGI work on the film. It feels as if there are a lot of different layers that have been put together. And we did do CGI work. Misho Ristov, the visual effects guy I always work with, worked very hard and long on cutting out everybody and putting them back in. However, the shot itself is completely realistic. So there's nothing that comes from another frame or another time. Basically, what he did, he cut them out so that he can clean them up and put them back together to make them uh, cleaner and clearer. But the way the film was put together was um, I framed the geography of it. I placed the actors in different positions, gave everybody very specific directions what to do. and then ask them, people walking through frames or running through frames, people walking away, coming towards us, playing, leaning over, giggling, a car driving, and then I asked them to keep repeating it, to turn it into a loop. So there was a loop that went on for several minutes where somebody would run through, come back behind the camera, run back, or then run this way. The car in the background is driving across frame and then driving in reverse and then driving again. The game of baseball keeps on going, and when they lose the ball, there's another ball that comes in. So it was a perpetual loop. And then we ended up with we shot in slow motion, but we needed to really slow it down even more. In Cuba, we weren't able to find a camera that was going to slow everything down to the degree that the film needed, and that's where Misha jumped in with the visual effects, and he slowed it down even more while keeping it feel smooth. So that was the whole thing. Otherwise, it was going to feel jerky every frame. Um, so the way it was shot was like in a very organic way, where the action was choreographed and then looped. So it went in circles, several takes. Then in the edit, what we did was we just looked for the right. I don't even remember what it was. Was it like 5-10 seconds or something? And then uh, slowed that down. And initially, it was going to be just that one shot. I picked up. I even advise my students to always pick up close-ups, even if you're not going to use them. And so I did the close-up of the boy, not really planning to use it. Um, and then in the editing, we started toying with, using the tableau and then a couple close-ups or maybe a few close-ups, maybe opening of the close-ups. Then I threw them all out except for that one close-up, which sort of busts the concept of uh, this conceptualist piece, one-shot piece, which is something I've done in the past. I've done several films that were single shots. But then sort of the film needed that close up, needed to go into that moment, into that void. So it was like, why not? Let's have the close up. Let's have the wide shot for most of the film, and then this close up as a finale.
Right. And since you were talking about the close up also reminds me of the sudden shift which happens in the soundscape of the film. And
Yeah.
this again also makes me wonder, like the soundscape of the film, first of all, it's brilliant. Like despite the film being so slow, the ticking sound, the clock ticking sound, it's actually faster than the usual clock sound, usual second sound. And there are this ambient sound which comes in throughout. So and it also forms a beautiful contrast because the sound, if we stretch a sound, it forms a very jarring, glitchy sort of a soundscape. But it is very calm, very very ambient. So I was just wondering, why did you choose this? I mean, how did you come across this sort of idea of putting this sort of sound? Can you talk?
Well, sure. I mean, the sound was a counterpoint to the image. There's much more happening in a way. There's shifts and cuts and crossfades on the soundtrack. And it starts as if at first it's a reflection on the image, but then it grows more expressionistic. There's sound, there's the clock, there's a music box, there the people you hear there. Um, it's a thing I learned, I guess, in a commercial I saw way back in the 80s, which felt very fast. It felt very edited. And then I taped the commercial and analyzed it. And it turned out that in 30 seconds it had only 9 cuts. But it was what was going on the soundtrack, how they edited the sound, shifts in both story and in perspective in the soundtrack that made it feel so dynamic. So I learned that and remembered it, and here I am, a couple hundred years later, using that that little trick. Yeah,
Yep, it actually brilliantly worked out, when you actually look at the shift which happened towards the last 2 minutes or 1 minute of the film. And finally, like, I don't know if I'm going to waste the experience of the viewers who have not even watched the film right now, but I was just wondering what made you come across the title, The End of Time, and especially when you are talking about birth, and with that symbolism of the pregnant woman and stuff like that. When you're talking about so much of regeneration, why are you talking about the end of time?
the end of time is that moment where time doesn't move anymore, where you're so happy in the present, in this moment, that everything has stopped and you're one with the universe. You're so happy that you feel as if nothing is gonna change after that. So that's where it came from.
And it happened when the child was listening to uh, a baby who's about to be born.
Yes, yes, the happiness of hearing his sister or his brother in his mom's belly.
Wow, that's really interesting because whenever we come about this sequence, the end of time, time getting paused, like in literature, Blanchot wrote a story. I exactly forgot the title of it, when exactly he was just about to be assassinated. Just the moment before assassination, there's this wall that opens up in front of him, and there's this profound pause, which is I mean, which is there in your film. But here it is a different case. It is coming out of profound ecstasy, happiness.
Yeah, yeah. This is a happy end of time.
Right, right, right. So, thank you very much for turning up for the interview, and we are really happy that you have joined us. And so,
All
would
right.
you just like to tell us about your future projects and where can we track them if you want to watch them?
Sure. Yeah. Well, the last film, the last feature film I did. Well, you're in India now, right?
Oh, oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. The
yeah, yeah,
last film
yeah.
I
I'm in
did.
India. Yeah, I thought you
Yeah.
did your last project in India. Sorry.
Yeah. No, I just wanted to mention that the last film I did was called Willow, and
Okay.
it
Yeah.
played a number of festivals, including a festival in Bangalore.
Acha. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. That's a
the
great
next,
place. Yeah.
yeah. By the way, it's my favorite country. I've been to India 4 times, and uh, a good portion of the photographs in this book of photographs I'm putting out next month were taken in India.
Wow.
So it's a book of photographs and an exhibition. They're called There, as in over there, and it's street photography,
Okay.
pictures I've taken over the last 10 years.
In India?
Pretty much, well, everywhere I've traveled, India and New York and Africa and across Europe and Macedonia. So it's a book of 88 street pictures in the tradition of Cartier-Bresson and Robert Frank and Alex Webb.
Wow.
And at the same time, I'm developing a film that I'm hoping to shoot next year. It's called Kaimak.
Okay.
Kaimak is this cream. It's like a cream cheese, something between cheese and butter.
Right. I,
And it's a black comedy about two couples in Macedonia whose stories intertwine and then they develop into something quite unexpected.
right. It was really great to hear about your photography exercise because me, myself, being an aspiring photographer, it's very interesting. I'm really looking forward to your work. So thank you for joining us again, Milcho. We wish to hear a lot from you in the future, and we'll be catching up on your films and, of course, your photography exhibition. Thank you for
Thank you so
submitting the
much.
work. Yeah.
Thank
Would
you
you
and
like to
same
have
time.
Yeah, would you like to give a message to all our audiences, because this is the first time we are organizing this multidisciplinary festival from Kolkata?
Just enjoy art and be nice to each other and be true. That's the message.
Wow. Thank you for your brevity.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank, thank you.